The scrub brush had worn calluses into her palms years ago, but nothing could toughen the tender skin of her knees enough to withstand 12 hours a day bent over planked floors in the Silver Spur Saloon. Annie Vaughn was 22 years old in the summer of 1882, and her knees were bleeding through the threadbare fabric of her only dress as she worked her way across the floor of the main gambling hall in Gila Bend, Arizona. The gambling tables stood empty in the morning light that filtered through dust-caked windows, but by afternoon they would be crowded with cowboys, prospectors, and drifters looking to lose their wages on cards and whiskey. She scrubbed harder, knowing that Samuel Pritchard, the saloon owner, would inspect every inch before opening, and any spot she missed would mean a docked wage or worse. The soap was lye-heavy and burned the cuts on her hands, mixing with the blood from her knees to create pink rivulets in the dirty water of her bucket. She had not always been a cleaning woman in a frontier saloon. 3 years ago, she had traveled west from Missouri with her father, chasing the promise of silver in the Arizona Territory. But fever took him 2 months after they arrived, leaving her alone in a harsh land with nothing but debts he had accumulated trying to stake a claim. Samuel Pritchard had offered her work, a room in the back, and just enough wages to keep her fed if she worked every waking hour. She had no choice but to accept. The alternative was starvation or worse fates that befell unprotected women in mining towns where men outnumbered women 10 to 1. The door swung open, letting in a blast of desert heat, even though it was barely 9 in the morning. Annie did not look up, kept scrubbing, kept her head down as she always did when anyone entered. Footsteps crossed the floor, spurs jingling with each step, and she scrubbed around the boots when they stopped beside her bucket. "Excuse me, sir, I am almost finished with this section," she said quietly, not raising her eyes. "Stop." The voice was low, rough from trail dust, but there was something in it that made her pause. Still, she did not stop scrubbing. She could not afford to stop. "I cannot stop, sir. I must finish before noon." The boots moved, and suddenly a hand was on her wrist, gentle but firm, stopping the motion of her brush. She looked up then, startled, her eyes traveling up past dusty chaps, a worn leather vest, a sun-darkened throat, to a face that made her breath catch. The man was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting, sharp features weathered by sun and wind, and eyes the color of slate that looked at her with an expression she could not name. More importantly, his gaze had dropped to her knees, where blood had soaked through her dress and was dripping onto the floor she had just cleaned. "Your knees are bleeding," he said, and there was something like anger in his voice, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "It is nothing, sir." "Please, I must continue working." Instead of releasing her wrist, he dropped his other hand to the bucket and pushed it aside. Then, before she could protest, he bent and lifted her up off the floor as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, dropping the brush, her hands instinctively reaching for his shoulders to steady herself as he straightened. "No more," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "You will not scrub another floor on your knees like this." "Sir, you do not understand. I must work. I have nowhere else to go. Put her down, irons." Annie twisted in the stranger's arms to see Samuel Pritchard standing in the doorway to his office, his face red with anger. The saloon owner was a thick man with a cruel mouth and small eyes that had looked at her with hunger ever since she started working for him. She had managed to avoid being alone with him, but she knew her luck would not hold forever. "This woman is injured," the man called Iron said calmly, not setting her down. "She needs medical attention. She is my employee, and she will work her hours or she will find herself on the street with nothing." Now put her down and get out of my establishment if you are not here to drink or gamble." Nathan Irons looked down at Annie, and she saw something shift in his expression. "How much does she owe you?" Pritchard's eyes narrowed with calculation. $300. Her father ran up debts before he died, and she has been working them off. She still has 2 years of work ahead of her at least. Annie closed her eyes. It was a lie. Her father's debts had been maybe $50 at most, and she had already worked off twice that amount. But she had no proof, no contracts, nothing but Pritchard's word against hers, and in a town like Bled, his word carried weight while hers carried none. "I will pay it," Nathan said. $300 for her debt, and whatever wages you owe her for the work she has already done. "Her wages go toward her debt," Pritchard said, but he was smiling now, the smile of a man who had just seen an opportunity for profit. $300 for the debt. And she does not get wages she has already earned because those went to her keep, her room and board. You want to buy out her contract, it will cost you $400. Take it or leave it. Annie opened her eyes and looked at Nathan, wanting to tell him not to do it, that she was not worth that much money, that he did not even know her. But the expression on his face stopped her. He was looking at Pritchard with barely controlled fury, and she realized that he knew exactly what kind of man the saloon owner was, knew that the debt was inflated and the situation exploitative, but he was going to pay anyway. "You have got yourself a deal," Nathan said quietly. "On one condition. You write out a document right now saying that her debt is paid in full, that you have no further claim on her labor or her person, and you sign it in front of witnesses." "Fine," Pritchard said, already moving toward his office, probably calculating how he would spend the windfall. $400 was more than most cowboys made in 2 years. Nathan carried Annie to a chair near the bar and set her down gently. She looked up at him, confused and overwhelmed, her knees throbbing now that she was no longer working through the pain. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." He crouched down in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "My mother scrubbed floors until her hands bled to keep me fed after my father died. I was 10 years old, and I swore that when I grew up, I would never let another woman work herself to death like that if I could prevent it. I have some money saved. I can spare it. But $400. I have been working cattle drives for 12 years, saving most of what I make. I was planning to buy some land, start a small ranch. I still have enough for that." He glanced toward Pritchard's office, then back at her. "Do you have anywhere to go? Anyone who can take you in?" She shook her head slowly. "No, my father was all I had. I came west with him from Missouri, but we have no other family. Then I have got a proposition for you if you will hear it." Before she could respond, Pritchard emerged from his office with a hastily written document. Nathan read it carefully, made him add several clauses to ensure there were no loopholes, then called over 2 men who had entered the saloon. They witnessed the document, and Nathan counted out $400 in gold and silver coins on the bar. Pritchard snatched it up, barely containing his glee, and shoved the signed document at Nathan. "Pleasure doing business with you, Irons. You just bought yourself a used-up cleaning woman. Hope she is worth it to you." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he folded the document carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. Then he turned back to Annie and offered his hand. "Can you walk? We need to get you to the doctor to have those knees looked at." She took his hand and stood, wincing as her knees bent. The bleeding had slowed, but the pain was sharp. Nathan frowned and then, without asking permission this time, simply picked her up again and carried her out of the Silver Spur into the bright Arizona morning. The town of Gila Bend was small even by frontier standards, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the stage route where the Gila River bent through the desert. The doctor's office was 3 buildings down, marked by a weather-beaten sign. Nathan carried her inside, shouldering the door open and calling out for the doctor. An older man emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a stained apron. Dr. Harrison had been in Gila Bend since before the town had a name, and his face showed every hard year of frontier medicine. He took one look at Annie's knees and gestured to an examination table. "Set her there." "What happened?" "She has been scrubbing floors on her knees for hours. They are bleeding through her dress." Dr. Harrison's expression darkened. "Working for Pritchard, I assume?" It was not really a question. He had seen this before. He shooed Nathan out of the examination area and helped Annie remove her dress so he could properly clean and bandage her knees. The cuts were not deep, but they were numerous and painful, and the skin was raw and inflamed. He worked efficiently, cleaning away the blood and dirt, applying a stinging antiseptic that made her gasp, then wrapping her knees in clean white bandages. "You cannot work on your knees for at least 2 weeks," he said firmly. "These need time to heal or they will become infected. And once they heal, I recommend finding different work, or at least getting some proper knee pads if you must scrub floors." "She will not be scrubbing any more floors." Nathan's voice came from beyond the curtain. "Not for Pritchard, not for anyone." The doctor raised an eyebrow at Annie, who could only shake her head helplessly. She still did not understand what was happening, why this stranger had paid such a huge sum for her freedom, what he wanted from her. She pulled her dress back on carefully, trying not to disturb the bandages, and limped out from behind the curtain. Nathan paid the doctor without being asked, and then they stepped back out into the heat. The sun was higher now, beating down mercilessly on the dusty street. Nathan offered his arm, and Annie took it gratefully, her legs shaky beneath her. "There is a boarding house just at the edge of town run by a widow named Mrs. Chen," Nathan said as they walked slowly. "She is a good woman, honest. I am going to take you there and rent you a room for a month. That will give you time to heal and figure out what you want to do next." "Mr. Irons, I cannot accept any more charity from you. You have already spent so much." "Nathan," he interrupted. "Call me Nathan. And it is not charity. I told you I made a proposition. I have not explained it yet." They reached the boarding house, a neat adobe building with a small garden in front where Mrs. Chen somehow coaxed vegetables from the desert soil. She was a Chinese woman who had come to Arizona with her husband during the railroad construction boom, and when he died in an accident, she had used his death benefit to buy this property and build a respectable business. She looked at Annie's bandaged knees, at Nathan's determined expression, and asked no questions, just showed them to a small, clean room on the second floor. "Meals are included," Mrs. Chen said. "Breakfast at 7, supper at 6. You need anything else, you let me know." After she left, Nathan stood awkwardly by the door while Annie sat carefully on the bed, the first real bed she had slept in since her father died. The room was simple but clean, with a window that looked out over the desert, whitewashed walls, and a small table with a basin for washing. "The proposition," Nathan said finally, "is this. I own a piece of land about 15 miles north of here, near the Gila River where it is actually green. I bought it 2 years ago, been building a house and barn in my spare time between cattle drives. I was planning to start running my own herd this fall, maybe hire a hand or two. But a ranch is hard work for one person, and I am going to need help." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I am also 28 years old, and I would like to have a family someday. A wife, children, a real home. The frontier is short on decent women, and I am not the type to frequent saloons looking for company." Annie's heart began to beat faster. She thought she understood where this was going, but it seemed impossible. "I know this is sudden," Nathan continued, And I know you have got no reason to trust me, but I am proposing a business arrangement that could become something more if we both wanted it to. You could come work on the ranch with me. I would pay you fair wages, give you your own room in the house, treat you with respect. You would help with the cooking, the garden, maybe the livestock once you learn, and we could get to know each other, see if we suit. If after a few months you decide you want to leave, I will give you enough money to get to California or back east or wherever you want to go. But if we find that we are compatible, maybe we could consider making it a permanent arrangement. Marriage, I mean. He was not looking at her while he spoke, his eyes fixed on the window, and Annie realized that he was nervous. This hard, capable man who had faced down Pritchard and carried her through town like she weighed nothing was nervous about asking her this question. "You do not even know me," she said softly, the same thing she had said in the saloon. "I could be lazy or cruel or a terrible cook. I could steal from you or burn your house down." "You could," he agreed, finally meeting her eyes. "But I saw you scrubbing that floor with your knees bleeding, trying your best to do good work even though you were in pain, and that bastard Pritchard did not deserve your effort. That tells me something about your character, and I figure we will learn the rest as we go." He shifted his weight, his hand on the door handle. "You do not have to decide right now. Take your month here, let your knees heal, think about it. I will be back in town in 2 weeks to check on you and see if you have got an answer." "Where are you going?" "Back to my land. I have got a fence that needs mending and a roof to finish, but I will leave money with Mrs. Chen for anything you need, clothes, supplies, whatever." He opened the door, then paused. "Annie, that is your name, right? I realized Pritchard never actually introduced us." "Yes, Annie Vaughn. Annie." "That is a good name." He smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face from harsh to handsome. "You rest up, and think about what I said." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs, and Annie was alone in a clean room with bandaged knees and a head full of confusion. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. She had gone from scrubbing floors in hopeless servitude to being offered a job, a home, and potentially a husband by a man she had just met. It was insane. She should be suspicious. He could be lying about everything, could have ulterior motives, could be dangerous. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face when he had first noticed her bleeding knees, saw the genuine anger at her mistreatment, the gentleness with which he had lifted her. She had been around enough cruel men in the last 3 years to recognize one, and Nathan Irons did not fit that pattern. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of suspended peace. Mrs. Chen fed her well. The bandages came off her knees, and the wounds healed cleanly thanks to the doctor's care and the enforced rest. Annie helped around the boarding house as much as she could, needing to feel useful, and Mrs. Chen accepted her help without comment. They fell into an easy companionship, 2 women who had both lost husbands, though in Annie's case it was a father, and the loss was just as profound. "This man who paid your debt," Mrs. Chen said one evening as they prepared supper for the boarders. "Nathan Irons. You know anything about him?" "Only what he told me. Do you know him?" "A little. He stays here sometimes when he is in town. Quiet man, polite, always pays on time. He has been working cattle drives for years, saving his money. He is not a drinker or a gambler. Not the type to start fights, but I have heard he finishes them when he has to." She paused, cutting vegetables with practiced efficiency. "He lost his parents young. Mother died from hard work and pneumonia when he was 12. Father had already been dead 2 years by then. He has been on his own since, making his way. I think that is why he did what he did for you. He sees his mother and women who are being worked to death. Annie absorbed this information, feeling it confirm what Nathan had told her. He asked me to come work on his ranch. He said it could be a business arrangement or something more, depending on how we suit each other. Mrs. Chen smiled. That sounds like him. Practical, but also hopeful, I think. You could do worse than Nathan irons Annie Vaughn, much worse, especially out here. I barely know him. True. But you have time to learn. And from what I have seen, he is a man of his word. If he says he will treat you with respect and give you a choice, he means it. When Nathan returned 2 weeks later, Annie was standing in the garden helping Mrs. Chen stake tomato plants. She saw him riding up the street on a strong bay horse, leading a second horse behind him, a pretty gray mare with a gentle eye. He dismounted and tied both horses to the rail before walking over to the garden gate. "You are looking better," he said, and she realized it was true. 2 weeks of good food and rest had put color in her cheeks and strength in her limbs. Her knees were still tender, but they were healed. "How do you feel?" "Better, thank you." "Much better." He nodded, glanced at Mrs. Chen, who discreetly excused herself and went inside. Nathan took off his hat and turned it in his hands, a gesture Annie was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Have you thought about my proposition?" Annie set down the stakes she was holding and brushed dirt from her hands. She had thought of little else for 2 weeks, weighing her options, considering her future. She could try to find work in Gila Bend, but opportunities for women were limited and often degrading. She could use some of the money Nathan had offered to travel to California or back east, try to start over in a city. But that idea left her feeling cold and alone, adrift in a world where she had no connections and no family. Or she could take a chance on a man who had shown her more kindness in one morning than anyone had in 3 years, who offered her not just work but the possibility of a home, a family, a future. "I have thought about it," she said, "and I would like to accept your offer." "The business arrangement, I mean. The job on the ranch." Something that looked like relief crossed his face. "I am glad. I was worried you would say no." "I am not saying yes to marriage," she clarified, needing him to understand. "Not yet. I need to know you better first, need to see if this is real and not just a dream that will evaporate." "That is fair," he said. "That is more than fair. I feel the same way, truth be told. I think we could be good together, but thinking and knowing are different things." He gestured to the gray mare. "I brought you a horse. Her name is Silver and she has got a sweet temperament. Do you know how to ride?" "A little. My father taught me the basics back in Missouri." "Good." "It is 15 miles to the ranch, and we should head out soon if we want to make it before dark. Mrs. Chen knows you are leaving?" "Yes, I told her this morning that I thought I would be going with you today." "She is a smart woman," Nathan said with a slight smile. "She probably knew before you did." An hour later, Annie was sitting on Silver with her few possessions in a bag tied to the saddle, riding north out of Gila Bend beside Nathan Irons. The desert stretched out around them, vast and harsh and beautiful, the saguaro cacti standing like sentinels in the afternoon heat. Nathan kept the pace easy, mindful of her inexperience, and pointed out landmarks as they rode. "That peak to the west, that is Woolsey Peak. You can see it from the ranch on clear days, and we will follow this wash for a while, then cut east where it meets the river. The land gets greener there, more water underground. That is why I chose it." They talked as they rode, the conversation coming easier than Annie had expected. Nathan told her about the ranch, about his plans for raising cattle and horses, about the garden he had started and the chickens he had bought from a Mexican family who lived 10 miles south. She told him about Missouri, about her childhood before her mother died, about the dreams her father had for striking it rich in the silver mines, and how those dreams had turned to dust. The sun was touching the western horizon when they finally arrived at the ranch. It sat in a green valley where the Gila River wound through the desert, creating an oasis of cottonwood trees and good grazing land. The house was small but solid, built of adobe with a wooden roof and a covered porch. The barn was newer, the wood still pale, and there was a corral with a few horses and a pen with chickens scratching in the dirt. "It is not much yet," Nathan said as they dismounted, "but it is home." Annie looked around, saw the care he had put into every detail, saw the potential in the land and the buildings. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "It is more than I expected." He showed her inside the house, which was sparse but clean. The main room had a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, some basic cooking equipment. There were 2 bedrooms, one of which was empty except for a bed frame. "I will sleep in the barn tonight," Nathan said. "Give you privacy to settle in. Tomorrow I will show you around properly, introduce you to the livestock, explain the routine. But tonight you should rest. It has been a long ride." "You do not have to sleep in the barn," Annie protested. I do," he said firmly but kindly. "We agreed this was a business arrangement to start. That means separate sleeping quarters and proper respect. I will not have you feeling uncomfortable or pressured in any way." That night, lying in a real bed in a quiet house with the sound of the river in the distance, Annie felt something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt hope. The days settled into a rhythm. Nathan was up before dawn every morning, tending to the horses and checking the cattle that grazed in the valley. Annie rose shortly after, made breakfast, and then worked on whatever task needed doing. There was always work on a ranch, more than 2 people could reasonably accomplish, but they tackled it together. She learned to milk the cow Nathan had bought from a neighboring ranch, learned to collect eggs without getting pecked, learned to tend the vegetable garden that struggled in the desert heat, but thrived near the irrigation ditch Nathan had dug from the river. He was patient with her inexperience, showing her how to do things without making her feel stupid or useless. In return, she proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker. Her cooking improved with practice, and she took pride in keeping the house clean and organized. But more than the work, it was the companionship that surprised her. Nathan was easy to be around, comfortable in his silence when they worked side by side, but also a good conversationalist when they sat on the porch in the evenings after supper. He told her about the years he had spent working cattle drives, about trailing herds from Texas to Kansas, sleeping under the stars, facing stampedes and river crossings and drought. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's flower garden and her father's stories and the small-town life she had left behind. They shared their losses and their hopes, their fears and their dreams, and slowly, carefully, they began to trust each other. 6 weeks after Annie arrived at the ranch, a summer storm rolled in from the west, one of the violent monsoons that occasionally drenched the desert. Nathan and Annie worked together to get the livestock secured and the chickens safe before the storm hit, but by the time they finished, the rain was coming down in sheets and lightning was splitting the sky. They ran for the house, both soaked to the skin by the time they burst through the door. Annie was laughing, exhilarated by the run and the storm, and Nathan was grinning as he pushed his dripping hair out of his eyes. But then their eyes met, and the laughter faded, replaced by something else, something that had been building between them for weeks. "Annie," Nathan said quietly, and the way he said her name made her breath catch. "Yes, I need to tell you something. I know we agreed to take this slow to see if we suit each other before making any decisions, but I think I already know. These past 6 weeks have been the best of my life. Coming home to you each day, working beside you, talking with you in the evenings. It feels right in a way nothing else ever has. Annie's heart was pounding. I feel the same way. Do you? He took a step closer, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor they would have to mop later. Because if you do, I would like to court you properly. Not just as a business partner, but as a woman I am hoping to marry someday, if you will have me. She closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his unshaven jaw under her fingers. I will have you, Nathan Irons. I think I have been yours since the moment you lifted me off that floor and told me no more. He kissed her then, gentle at first, almost tentative, and then deeper as she responded, her arms going around his neck, his hands on her waist pulling her closer. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. We should wait until we are married, he said, and she heard the regret and the determination in his voice. I want to do this right. I want to respect you. I know, she whispered, and I love you for that, but Nathan, I do not want to wait long. He laughed, the sound full of joy. Neither do I. How about we ride into Bled next week and talk to the minister? We could be married by the end of the month. That sounds perfect. They were married 4 weeks later in the small church in Bled, with Mrs. Chen and Dr. Harrison as witnesses. Annie wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Nathan wore his best shirt and a nervous expression that made Annie want to laugh and cry at the same time. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with such tenderness that she knew she had made the right choice, that this man would cherish and protect her for the rest of their lives. The first year of marriage was not easy. Ranch life was demanding, and there were challenges they had not anticipated. A drought killed half the garden and they lost several head of cattle to disease. But they faced each difficulty together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the victories, no matter how small. Nathan proved to be a devoted husband, affectionate and attentive, always making sure Annie knew she was valued and loved. And Annie blossomed under his care, growing stronger and more confident, becoming a true partner in running the ranch. They talked about everything, their communication open and honest. When they disagreed, they worked through it with respect and patience. When they succeeded, they shared the joy. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered the physical side of their love, which was tender and passionate and deepened their bond even further. In the spring of 1884, Annie discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Annie said, looking up at him with tears of happiness in her eyes. Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy baby boy with Nathan's dark hair and Annie's green eyes. They named him Samuel, not after the cruel saloon owner but after Nathan's father, reclaiming the name for something good and pure. Nathan was an attentive father, doting on his son, waking in the night to help with feedings, making toys from scraps of wood, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow always soothed the baby. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Nathan's hard work and careful management paid off, and they were able to expand their herd, hire a ranch hand to help with the heavy work, and make improvements to the house and barn. Annie established a large garden that produced enough vegetables to feed them year-round and even sell some in town. She also started keeping bees, harvesting honey that became locally famous. 3 years after Samuel was born, they had a daughter. They named her Rose, and she had her mother's blonde hair and her father's serious expression. Nathan loved both his children fiercely, teaching Samuel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and carrying Rose everywhere in a sling Annie made so the baby could be with them while they worked. Life was good, full of hard work and simple pleasures. They had built something real together, a home and a family that was rooted in love and respect. Annie sometimes thought back to that day in the Silver Spur saloon, scrubbing floors with bleeding knees, hopeless and alone. It seemed like another lifetime, like it had happened to a different person. One evening, when Samuel was 7 and Rose was 4, they were all sitting on the porch after supper. Samuel was playing with the wooden horses Nathan had carved for him, and Rose was on Annie's lap, thumb in her mouth, fighting sleep. Nathan reached over and took Annie's free hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You remember the day we met?" he asked. "Of course. How could I forget? I almost did not go into the saloon that morning. I was just passing through Gila Bend, heading north to check on the ranch. But my horse needed water and I thought I might get a drink. Then I saw you on the floor, saw your knees bleeding, and something in me just snapped. I could not walk away." "I am glad you did not," Annie said softly. "You saved me, Nathan. You gave me back my life." "No," he said, squeezing her hand. "You gave me a life worth living. Before you, I was just existing, working, saving money for some vague future that never seemed real. But you made it real. This ranch, these children, this family, you made it all mean something." She leaned over and kissed him, careful not to disturb the sleeping Rose. "We made it together." As the years passed, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Nathan's reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread, and he was often consulted by neighbors on cattle and land management. Annie became known for her garden and her honey, and also for her kindness to travelers and newcomers to the area. Their home was always open, their table always had room for one more, and they helped many people who were struggling, remembering what it was like to be desperate and alone. Samuel grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved the ranch and planned to take it over when Nathan eventually retired. Rose became a spirited girl who loved horses more than anything and could outride boys twice her age. In 1893, Annie gave birth to twins, another boy and girl whom they named William and Grace. The house was chaotic and loud and full of love. Nathan and Annie grew older together, their hair graying, their faces weathering with years of desert sun, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, rooted in the shared experiences of building a life together. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, still talked about everything and nothing. One evening in 1902, when they had been married for 20 years, Annie sat beside Nathan on the porch they had rebuilt twice over the years, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel had married a schoolteacher from Tucson, and they had 3 children who visited often. Rose was still unmarried, running the horse breeding operation she had convinced Nathan to start. The twins were 16, full of energy and dreams. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Saying yes to me all those years ago, taking a chance on a stranger?" Annie looked at him, at the man who had lifted her up when she was at her lowest, who had given her dignity and choice and love. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You are the best decision I ever made, Nathan Irons." He smiled, the same smile that had transformed his face that first day in the boarding house, and kissed her temple. "I love you, Annie. I have loved you from the moment I saw you trying so hard to do good work even though you were hurting, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "My cowboy, my hero, my home." They sat together as the sun set over the desert, over the life they had built together, over the family they had created. The ranch spread out around them, green and prosperous, a testament to hard work and determination. But more than that, it was a testament to love, to the power of one person choosing to help another, to the miracle that could happen when two lonely people found each other and decided to build something together. Annie thought back one more time to that morning in the saloon, to the moment Nathan had lifted her off the floor and said, "No more." Those two words had changed everything, had set in motion a series of events that led to this moment, to this life, to this profound and lasting happiness. She had been scrubbing floors until her knees bled, hopeless and trapped, and he had given her freedom. But more than that, he had given her love, and she had given it back to him, multiplied 1,000-fold. In the years that followed, they continued to thrive. Nathan lived to be 73, still working the ranch with Samuel until the very end, still sharp and strong despite his age. When he finally passed peacefully in his sleep in 1927, Annie held his hand and whispered all the things she had told him 1,000 times before, but needed to say once more. He had been her salvation, her partner, her great love, and life without him was dimmer, harder, sadder. But she was not alone. She had their children, their grandchildren, and eventually their great-grandchildren. She had the ranch they had built together, the legacy they had created. She lived another 12 years after Nathan's death, surrounded by family, telling stories of the old days, of the wild Arizona territory, of a cowboy who had walked into a saloon and changed her life with a simple act of kindness and 2 perfect words. When Annie Vaughn Irons died in 1939 at the age of 79, she was buried beside Nathan on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the desert sky they had both loved. Her children and grandchildren stood at the graveside, remembering a woman of strength and grace, a woman who had survived hardship and emerged stronger, a woman who had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. The ranch continued through the generations, kept in the family, a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose love over fear, partnership over exploitation, hope over despair. And sometimes, when the desert wind blew through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and mesquite, the descendants of Nathan and Annie would sit on the porch of the house that had been rebuilt and expanded many times but still stood in the same spot, and they would tell the story. They would tell of a woman scrubbing floors until her knees bled, of a cowboy who lifted her up and said, "No more," of a love that grew from compassion into something eternal. It was a story of the Wild West, of harsh lands and harder times, but ultimately it was a love story, a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, kindness and courage could change everything. It was the story of Nathan and Annie, and it would be told and retold for as long as the ranch stood, as long as the river flowed, as long as there were hearts that believed in the power of love to transform lives and create legacies that would last forever.